we're going to be looking at creating a bean configuration. So this is not from my video, but it's from a different one. I can't link it because it is part of a Percipio course, but this is just what I've taken away from it. I've had to make some modifications to get it to work, so we're going to be going over there as well. So in here, we're going to be talking about the creating a bean configuration. So we want to touch on the pom.xml file and dependencies. So we're going to want to make a new Maven project in our IntelliJ. We can also use Eclipse. So I'm just going to do IntelliJ for here, but it's super easy to do in Eclipse as well, and we'll look at that in a second. So if we go to File, we go to New, and then we go to Project. We just want to be in New Project for this, most updated Eclipse. We can title it whatever we want, we can put it in whatever location we want. We want to make sure we have Java, and we have Maven selected. And then we want our JDK to be the latest one, so we can use like 18.0.1. And then with this, we can just click download our JDK, and it should download as 18.01 or the most up-to-date one. And then we can click create from here. We don't need to touch on the advanced settings, and it's going to create our project like this. I called mine Spring IOC. In Eclipse, you go to File, you go to New, you go to Other, and then you type in like Maven here. And then you could create a Maven project from here. So it's a little bit different. You just click next, you choose your workspace, project, whatever, and then you would just click finish from here, adding an archetype. I'm not entirely sure. I think this is the exact way to do it, but I would probably add like the Spring archetype. And that's how I believe you get the same thing in Eclipse. I'm using IntelliJ mostly for this. So in our IntelliJ, the first thing we're going to look at is our pom.xml file. Some of this is going to be included, like the very beginning part should be included. If it's not, just copy it, super easy. So we have our group ID, artifact ID, and version ID. This should be like given to us as well. And then we're going to want to have our dependencies in here. And so we can import these, and this will be imported through the main, but this is what it's going to look like for our dependency. We want the Spring framework inside of here so that we can go off that. And then we're going to want to have properties inside of here. You can see if we have a Maven compiler source and target, and this is going to be for 18 and 18 right here. And this should be our /project. Next, we want to look in the main file. So to do this, we are going to open our folder for src, open main, and we're going to want to make a new package inside of here. So we go down to package, we're just going to call it com.skillsoft. And so we're going to put our IoT device and main inside of here. So we would right click the package and make a new class, IoT device and main. We're going to look at these in a second, but we want to now make our XML file. Our XML file is going to be in resources. We have application context.xml, and this is what it's going to look like. So there should be this version right here. It's encoding with UFT-8. And now we're going to create our beans. So we have beans XML NS, and this is accessing the springframework.org/schema beans. And then we have this right here being set, and then we have our schema instance inside of here, and then our schema location like this. These lines are going to be created out of our IoT class that we've made, 6 and 7. So we have our bean ID, my IoT device bean, and then your class is called com.skillsoft.iot device. We have our IoT device right here, and our package is the com.skillsoft. So com.skillsoft is for the package, .iot device is for our class. It's important to have in our class. We can write an alias name if we want to. We don't have to, but we can, and this is just another way to reference it. So we have my IoT device bean, and we're aliasing this as my bean, and then we're closing this right here. Now, a few things I had to change. In the video, it did not include this www in here, but we want to include the www, and we're changing this from 3.0 to 3.1.xsd. That's important to note for here. If you're having any errors, like I had a problem with this before, you could hover over it, you click more actions, click manual, and then there is a way to just configure and add it in here. Next, we're going to look at how a bean can be injected into our application. So we're going to manage beans with the Spring factory, and this is going to be for our main and our IoT. So making the main class, after we do this, this serves as a component to the application where dependencies can be injected. The object this main class is dependent on is the IoT device, which we've also made and we're going to configure. The bean factory interface provides us the specifications in order to manage objects using the Spring IOC container. The next line allows us to manage our XML beans. This is a resource placed within the class path of our application. To access this, we're going to need our class path resource, which we have here, which is also an implementation of the resource interface. So we have all of these here and we can write our code. Now we don't need to write all this out, we can write all of this down here and then hover over our errors and import them that way. I find that to be much easier, and that is the way I always go about doing it. So in the main method, we set up our IoT device instance using a regular Java constructor. We have our IoT device, we're calling it myConstructedObject, and we're setting it equal to a new IoT device. There's no dependency injection here, we're just calling it right here. We're going to pass it as our output, and we're going to see that right here. We can see we have our IoT initialized with a constructor, that's what we have here, and then we're passing in myConstructedObject. Now myConstructedObject is going to call our IoT device here. And this is a great way to introduce this. Our IoT device is basically just going to be a class. We can see that we have some variables right here. Good practice to actually make these private. So we have this private, and we have this private, and then we can use getters, setters, and a toString, and this toString is going to be like a constructor, and it's going to output this information when we call this. So we have myConstructedObject, and it's going to print out IoT device. We have our device air condition and description temperature sensor. Later, we are not going to hard code these. We're going to actually pass through information here. So that's really cool, and we will see that later. But again, this is just our toString. It's a standard. It's going to get passed out here. So now we have our IOC going to our Bean factory. The main class depends on our IoT device instance. In order to retrieve this without having to do so explicitly, we use our Spring IOC container. To do this, we are going to want to point to our class file. We use the class path resources class. So we are setting a resource, we're calling it just resource, and we're setting it equal to a new class path resource, and we get our application context.xml file. So we're getting this XML file to access our beans right here. We want to retrieve this without having to do so explicitly for our IOC container. This XML file contains the definition of the bean, which the main class also depends on, so we need this for our bean. And then, to create and manage the bean, we pass it to our XML bean factory. So we have our bean factory, calling it bean factory, and we set it to a new XML bean factory, and we're passing in our resource. The strike through means this class is deprecated. Later, the video covers how we can extend the bean factory and use its vast features. We invoke the bean factory getBean method after this. We need to specify the name and ID of the bean, which we would like to inject to the program. This returns an object, so we have to cast it as an IoT device. So when we have our bean factory.getBean, we pass in my IoT device bean. We get the bean right here, but we want to store it as an IoT device, right? We're calling it my device bean, so we need to cast this as my IoT device bean. And then we can pass my IoT device bean out here, and we can see after we do all of that, we are going to get the same output right here. We can see that we've commented out a lot of code right here. We've also added some new imports, but we'll touch on those in a second. So what we've done here is we've gone about this a different way. We can accomplish this same task using the bean definition registry. The bean definition registry allows us to register beans and then retrieve beans from the registry. So we have this default list with the bean factory in here. And then we have our XML bean definition reader right here, which is going to allow us to read it. And this is because to load a bean registry, the definitions of beans, from our XML file, we need the XML bean definition reader. So we have our bean definition registry, default listable bean factory, and our XML bean definition reader. We're going to pass it with our class path resource, and this is of type resource, so put it in here. Commented everything out. We still want to make a new instance for our class path right here, and we're going to pass in our application context.xml. So we're using our XML file that we've made. We're not touching anything else other than in here. So we have this, and then we have our bean definition registry, bean factory. So we're using the bean definition registry that we have this name, and we're setting it to a new default listable bean factory. And then we have our XML bean definition reader, bean reader here is equal to a new bean definition reader. We pass in this bean factory that we made. And then we have our bean reader dot, and then we want to load inside of here our resource. And our resource is the class path for our application context.xml. So we're loading this inside of here, passing all that in. So here we have the new instance of our bean factory, serves as our container, getting the definitions of our beans, and then loading the definitions from the XML file, past the XML file in form of a resource. So we want to pass the name of the bean, we want to inject into the program, and then return the object. So we have our IoT device, which is going to be what we have here. We want to pass it inside of here to get this information. It's called my device bean, and then we are casting this as an IoT device. We're also casting this as a default listable bean factory. In our bean factory is what we're passing in. So we have a bean factory, and then we have to do .get bean, and we pass in my IoT device bean. And we have our my IoT device bean right here. So that's what we're going to get and pass in here. Another way we can do this is, because this is a cast, we can actually take this out and place it instead right here. So we have our default listable bean factory, getting rid of the parentheses, and now we should not need to cast it. So we can just do bean factory dot get bean like this, and this is going to print out the same output as we have here. So we can go up to our public static void main, we can run it, and we can see that it'll give us our XML bean factory deprecated, which is in our system.println, and then we have our my device bean. And our my device bean is right here. We've casted this as an IoT device so that we can use it as an IoT device, and then we've gotten the bean where we have our air condition and the temperature sensor in here. So that's how we would look at managing beans with the Spring Bean Factory.